In the US, student loan debt is a very serious issue. It is very divisive, it is very politically dividing, and it is becoming a key hot button issue, especially for younger adult, millennial, and Generation Z voters in the upcoming election, and I'm sure this will be the case for future elections as well. And recently, Elizabeth Warren was confronted by a parent of a kid that's about to go to college, and I'll talk about that story more in a little bit, but first I want to give you the background of the total student loan debt situation here in the US. So this data is according to the Federal Reserve on their website. This is from outstanding amounts of business and household credit. And this is from the Fed's November 2019 Financial Stability Report. So they compile a lot of this data, and they've been warning us now recently. I've talked about the leveraged loan portion of the Financial Stability Report from November 2019. This Financial Stability Report is released twice per year, by the way. So student loan debt, according to the Federal Reserve, is over $1.6 trillion outstanding. And over the last 12 months, give or take, from the second quarter of 2018 to the second quarter of 2019, the report, remember, came out towards the end of 2019. The growth rate of student loan debt, according to the Federal Reserve, is still growing at 5.1% per year. And the growth rate for student loan debt from 1997 to the present, according to the Federal Reserve's latest research, is an astounding 9.3% compounded per year. Compound annual growth rate. Student loan debt growing at 9.3%. The only amount of debt that has grown faster is the leveraged loan portfolio, the leveraged loans, which are growing unbelievably fast. More than double digit. So student loan debt outstanding here in the US, since we're doing the background information now, is more than auto loans according to the Fed, and more than auto loan debt and more than credit card debt by substantial amounts, by over $500 billion for credit card debt. So there's more than $500 billion more of student loan debt here in the US than credit card debt, and over $400 billion more in student loan debt than auto loan debt. It is substantial. Now, there are a lot of people arguing, especially Democrat politicians, but now there's more conservatives and Republicans like Danielle DiMartino Booth. She's been talking about this on her Twitter because she's worried about the demographics in the U.S. and household formation and how the demographics of the U.S. will get bad. But it's mostly Democrat politicians, at least for now, who are like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and others, who are talking about free education and bailing out students who borrowed way too much student loan debt. And there's just absolutely massive amounts of student loan debt. It's more than 5 figures for a lot of different students out there. I've met people with well over $100,000 in student loan debt to get their master's degree, and this is preventing them from starting a family. It's preventing them from, even certain cases, getting a car. And all these bills and bad credit score and all these things are adding up and making life, the normal adult life, a lot more difficult. And this is why people like Danielle DiMartino Booth, who is a conservative, are worried about this, because in the long term, this is going to hurt demographics, because normal young adults are not able to do the things of generations past because of the perpetual increase in student loan debt, in tuition. I am an entrepreneur. I have not tried doing a pitch meeting for an angel investor recently, but in my slide deck, I was doing research on this for tuition, the scam that is tuition hikes and textbook hikes. And according to my research, I pulled this from a number of different studies, that tuition and fees for schools, for universities, have increased over 500% in the last few decades, including over 1,000% increase in textbook prices since 1977. So it's astounding. And the Wall Street Journal in 2016, on April 7th, 2016, from an article from Josh Mitchell, and this was obviously almost 4 years ago, and they said that more than 40% of student borrowers aren't making payments on their student loans. So more than 40% of student loan borrowers are either in default, delinquency, or have postponed repaying their student loans. So this is a very, very serious issue, because if young adults are not having normal household formation, getting married, having kids, the US is going to have a demographics problem. Now, obviously, there's other factors involved with this as well, with like illegal immigration and feminism and sugar daddy, sugar baby stuff. I don't want to go into all those things right now. I just want to focus mostly on the student loan debt problems, how a lot of irresponsible, I really have to blame the parents. Okay, because these are 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, depending upon what age they go to college. You know, if the kid has AP credits, the kid's going a little bit younger to college than age 18. But these are kids that are borrowing way too much debt, and the parents need to step in and tell the kids that you should not be borrowing $80,000, $100,000, over $100,000 in student loan debt for a degree where you might not be able to get a good job and pay it back. So you can't blame the kids. This is bad parenting. This is irresponsible parenting. This is bad financial literacy, bad financial education. This falls at the feet of the parents. The parents need to make sure that the kids are not loading themselves with this much debt. There's a lot of bad parenting here in the US, and it's not just with financial problems and student loan debt. There's a lot of other problems with parenting, and it's been going on for over a generation now, in my opinion. So let me talk now about the Elizabeth Warren situation, and this is probably going to hurt her in the polls. She's already falling in the polls. This might be the death knell here, because she's pissing off a lot of people with her comments about this. So she was in Iowa for the Iowa caucus, I guess. I don't know if they had it yet, but the article talks about, quote, "You're screwing us. Warren defends plan to cancel student debt after father confronted her in Iowa." The Democratic senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, a.k.a. Pocahontas, a.k.a. no original thought in her life. She literally, anything that's popular or that she thinks is polling well, she will copy, because her student loan debt forgiveness plan is copied directly from Bernie Sanders, I believe. Defended her plan to pay off, who is now rising rapidly in the polls, and a lot of the non-far left radical Democrats are getting upset and worried about Bernie becoming so popular. Defended her plan to pay off college loans after being confronted by a father in Iowa in an exchange that went viral. So I will not play the audio here. I'm going to attach a link if you want to listen to the audio. It's from a background microphone. It's not directly on the father or Elizabeth Warren. So there's a lot of background noise. I listened to it. It's really tough to hear everything. It's just easier to read the dialogue. And if you want to listen to it yourself, you can. The father approached Warren, a leading Democrat presidential contender, after a campaign event in Grimes, Iowa. Quote, "My daughter's getting out of school. I saved all my money so she doesn't have any student debt. Am I going to get my money back?" the man asked Warren. Quote, "Of course not," Warren replied, and I believe she laughed, which is what the father got pissed off about. Quote, so we end up paying for people who didn't save any money, then those who did the right thing get screwed," the father told her. He then described a friend who makes more money than he does, but doesn't save up while he worked double shifts to save up to pay for his daughter's college. Also on the audio, I believe he also talks about how he did not go on family vacations. He lived below his means. He lived very frugally to make sure that his daughter was not going to have massive amounts of student loan debt when she went to college. And the father became upset, accusing Elizabeth Warren of laughing. And I quote, "We did the right thing and we get screwed," he added before walking off. And then Elizabeth Warren then went on a PR campaign explaining that she would not have been able to go to college if there was not discounted college. And not really apologizing. It wasn't a apology tour. It was a PR spin tour. There's already, Mark says, forgiving student debt would allow for this melt up to continue. If you're familiar with how it works for federal government employees, and since I've lived here in the DC metro area now for around 20 years, and I'm very familiar, I have friends who are federal government employees, and some of my friends have been like second or third generation government employees over the years. And what the federal government has in place now, and I'm not sure if this is a case for other state governments, but I know this is a case for the federal government around here, is if you work for the federal government for 10 years, your student loan debt's all forgiven. So that's why a lot of people are so desperate to get a federal government job nowadays. So forgiving the student loan debt creates a lot of problems as well. I mean, that's a lot more money that's going to get printed to forgive that debt. Jim Rickards has actually talked about this recently in his new book, which came out last year, called Aftermath: 7 Secrets of Wealth Preservation in the Coming Crisis. It's available on audiobook. It's a pretty good listen. There's some very interesting tidbits in there, like Timothy Geithner's comments about how the bailouts might look in the near future, how they'll be guarantees instead of necessarily new currency swap lines or other things, that the central banks or governments will just guarantee things that were not guaranteed. And in the Aftermath book, Jim Rickards was talking about how in the near future, he doesn't know if it's going to be the 2020 election or the 2024 election, but he expects that student loan debt will get a full bailout, and he thinks that that will drastically blow out the current federal government budget deficits. So the official federal government budget deficits are already projected for 2020 and going forward to be at least in the $1.2 trillion to $1.4 trillion range. That's officially. Off balance sheet, there's a lot more spending. That's not counting unfunded liabilities. But Jim Rickards is expecting, according to his research and in that book, and he's a conservative and he's not in favor of the student loan debt bailout. He thinks that either Bernie Sanders or a Bernie Sanders type politician will win the White House either in 2020 or 2024. It's looking probably like 2024 since Trump has raised so much money. Trump is still polling fairly well, and a lot of the Democrat candidates look pretty bad. The Democrat candidates a lot of them are slipping in the polls. Just, it's a mess with a lot of the Democrat candidates. I don't want to go into detail on that. So Jim Rickards is not in favor of student loan debt bailouts like Danielle DiMartino Booth is. Danielle DiMartino Booth is a conservative, but her argument, and she talks about this on Twitter, I've had a Twitter exchange with her, I don't know if she's written articles about this in her newsletter elsewhere, is from a demographic standpoint that the U.S. needs those younger adults, those Generation Xers, those Generation Zs, those Millennials and Generation Zs to have household formation, so to get married and have kids and make sure that the U.S. has good demographics long term. So I think it really depends on how many Democrats end up controlling the Congress for House of Representatives and the Senate. So can the Democrats get a 2/3 majority, and can they also control the White House? Because then it will be a lot easier for the Democrats to reverse a lot of the things that Trump has done and reinstall some type of Obamacare or universal health care, put in some type of universal basic income, and then go for broke with student loan debt bailouts. But the student loan debt bailouts are going to create a lot more division between people. So if a family actually did the right thing and saved up money and made sure that their kid was not going to graduate with mass amounts of student loan debt, regardless of what job they have, they're actually going to be penalized. So this is moral hazard in the system. Moral hazard is where an economic actor does really, really bad behavior, and a politician or a central government or central bank or group of politicians then goes and bails out the actor that did really, really dumb, bad behavior, that went and borrowed too much money and lost all the money or made bad decisions with credit and borrowing. Anthony says, and I agree with him, if the government never got involved in student loans, and tuition prices would have never got out of control. Yep, totally agree. There's also a scam with textbooks. They change, literally in a lot of these textbooks, they change a couple words, reissue a new volume, and then the used textbooks become almost worthless. They go from like $100 or $200 for a new textbook, sometimes more than that, down to like a $2. So not only do you have the tuition scam with perpetual tuition hikes, and a lot of these universities are not reinvesting the money efficiently back into schools. So the classrooms are not improving. The classrooms don't have new technology. The teachers are not using better materials. They're not moving a lot more of the classrooms online. That's not what's happening. There's new football stadiums. Sometimes there's nice new dorms, but mostly a lot of these universities are getting unbelievably large endowments. And then also, the kids are getting brainwashed. The kids are getting brainwashed by Marxist professors. So it depends on which major the kid is learning. But you're sending your kid to basically a government school if they've already been in a government school from kindergarten through high school. And they're going to get brainwashed even more. Anthony says his professors at Nassau Community College, that's in Long Island? That's where my family's from originally. My mom's side. We're all communist. Yeah, I had a history. History was one of my degrees at the University of Virginia Tech, and almost all my professors were hardcore Democrat, Marxists, and socialists. So they were all extremely biased. We're talking like they loved FDR. Like they had pictures of FDR in their office, and they had like FDR like victory newspaper posters. Like they had things like that. So this is just going to be a short show. So what do you think about all this? Do you think then that the U.S. for better demographics should do a bailout? Because I don't have a vote in the matter, clearly, because the White House is going to have its own agenda and the Congress is going to have its own agenda. But I think at some point, whether it's after the 2020 election or after the 2024 election, or whenever they can try to groom AOC to run for president, because she's just going to copy all of Bernie Sanders' policies anyways, that they're going to try to ram this down our throats. And Jim Rickards thinks, and someone said here in the chat section that Jim Rickards is a scamster. His newsletters for Agora use predatory marketing, but I think a lot of his information in his books and his Physical Gold Fund podcasts, there's a lot of good information still that you can get from him. Now, I don't like the marketing material for his newsletters, and I don't know if his paid investment newsletters are good, but I don't trust any one expert. But I think some of his information is very good. And he thinks that at some point that all the student loan debt will get a full bailout, and that will drastically blow out the federal government budget 1 year to well over $1 trillion extra. So he thinks that in the near future, maybe after the 2020 election, maybe 2021 or something like that, depending upon who wins in 2020, that the federal government budget deficit could blow out by an extra $1 trillion that people were not expecting, and that could cause the dollar to get weaker than people think. Mark asks, is the student loan debt factored into the inflation rate? Which inflation rate? Are you talking about CPI? You talking about Austrian money supply? You talking about Chapwood Inflation Index? Shadow stats? Which one? I do not think it's factored into the CPI. Taylor says Bernie is really picking up steam among Democrat voters and ahead of Biden by 7 points. Iowa caucus is quickly approaching. Yeah, so Bernie, according to the Predicted, which Jim Bianco is updating people on his Twitter frequently, that Bernie is now ahead in New Hampshire and Iowa for now. And Elizabeth Warren is falling very quickly in the polls. The average student loan debt is not $20,000. The average student loan debt's over $50,000. Taylor says, and I agree, Taylor Collins says, if they, quote, forgive student loan debt, there will be a new form of tension between the far left and financial conservatives. Also more moderate Democrats, because there is Democrat families that did, especially working class families, that are aware of how bad debt is, and they did not want their kids to go to school with mass amounts of student loan debt. So there will be further division there. And unfortunately, there's a lot more division here in the US on race, class, gender, and age. And forgiving student loan debt is only going to make things worse, because any family or kid that busted their ass after college and paid off those student loan debts and then they're not getting a bailout, there's going to be enormous amounts of anger, jealousy, and resentment. If you think it's bad now, wait till they're selectively giving out bailouts like that. But then again, if Bernie Sanders wins an election or AOC wins in 2024 when she's actually allowed to run, you have to be over 35 years old here in the US to run for US president. That might be one of the main talking points to get people to vote. I mean, these politicians like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they're trying to buy votes. Free healthcare, free education. They have no real idea how to pay for it. What? It's all MMT, right? It's all supposed to be MMT. Monetary populism. Max says 80% of the student loan debt belongs to women. I think it's like, I don't know if it's 80. I think it's 60 or 70, but it could be 80. I've heard it's way over 50%. I actually know in this area, I know a very, very beautiful blonde woman in her low 30s, and she has almost $200,000 in student loan debt. She voted for Trump. She likes capitalism, and I don't know if anyone will marry her because of the student loan debt she has. I went on a date with her years ago. I didn't know how much student loan debt she had, and then she was joking about how she has like almost $200,000 in student loan debt. She has a pretty good job, but at that amount of student loan debt, it's almost 200 grand with a master's degree. It's going to be very hard for her to pay back that student loan debt. And she's not living below her means. Anthony, probably the 6/6s. Thomas says, what about the kids still in college and the U.S. government pays off student loans? The kids still have 2 more years of college. Those kids, if they could vote, there'd probably be clauses in there where they would get some type of bailout, maybe a partial bailout. Thomas, the main point of all this is it's going to create even more division, even more divisiveness, even more anger and resentment. It's going to divide Americans even more because everyone is not going to get the bailout. No, she had an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree. When you add that up, I mean, it's over $100,000 at a pretty good university. Jonathan says the bailout will make a lot of people go to college. Well, hopefully less people will go to college because of the debt. But yeah, you're right. It may create more moral hazard. If people know they don't have to pay the money back, they'll take it out. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Greg. I appreciate it. Yeah, so we have a real problem here with student loan debt here in the U.S. It's absolutely massive. It's creating demographic problems. Obviously, there's other factors in why household formation and the amount of young adults my age are not having as many kids. There's other factors. Obviously, inflation, the cost of living going up in many major U.S. cities, but student loan debt is a major factor in why young adults my age are not settling down. The price of tuition has gone up a lot just in the last 12 years. I went to a university state school undergrad, and it was only $5,000 a year for tuition back then. So it was fairly reasonable per year for tuition. It wasn't that much money. And I think right after I graduated, the state of Virginia jacked the tuition up for in-state tuition. They moved it from like $5,000 a year. I think it's like $20,000 or $25,000 a year now. It's a lot. But they were charging out-of-state students at my university. Out-of-state students were getting paid, were paying. Their tuition was three or four times as much as in-state. And then you have these articles. My friend Floyd, who's posted this in the Wall Street for Main Street Facebook group, this article, he posted that last week. This article is from May 15th, 2019, saying the net worth of the average American family is, I think, $11,000 in savings or something like that right now, according to the article. Yeah, age 35 or younger, $11,100. And you know what? I live in a fairly affluent county, one of the 5 richest average median family income counties in all the United States. And I know a lot of young adults my age, and I don't know a lot of them that have $11,000 in savings. They have student loan debt payments, they have auto loan payments, they have credit card bills, they have rent if they don't own a home. If they own a home, they have a mortgage payment, which is high here. A lot of them do not live below their means. They don't like talking about investments or anything like that. A lot of my regular friends who are not libertarian. They may have a little bit of exposure in a retirement account to the stock market. But the majority of people I know, age 35 or younger, who graduated college are not doing well to have $11,000 in savings now. So I think that number is skewed. The mean and median, I think, for that data is skewed real bad. Patrick says college is also an inefficient way to learn. Now it's an inefficient way to learn because you have podcasts, you have audiobooks from Audible, you have virtual classrooms, you can read online articles. There's a lot of material that you can learn. You can buy used textbooks on your own. You can go to a used bookstore or buy used textbooks online from Amazon or somewhere else. There's a lot of ways to learn very cheaply and inefficiently now. There's all these new websites that offer like Skillshare and all these other ones that offer Masterclass, Skillshare and Masterclass, that offer all different types of courses that you can learn how to cook, and you can learn all these different interesting and useful skills. You can learn how to code. I probably shouldn't say learn to code because Twitter doesn't like that. Thomas says he thought the average Americans have less than $1,000 in the bank and most are living paycheck to paycheck. This is correct. And then you have articles but that's not a mainstream article. So that article is from Michael Snyder, Economic Collapse blog, or one of his other blog websites, where 41% of adult Americans barely have $1,000 in savings in the bank. And then you have mainstream articles from CNBC that came out last year, their personal finance website, from Kathleen Elkins, saying something different. Wow, blockchain code for blockchain pays $500,000 a year. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, well, this is just going to be a short show. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover. But the bottom line is this is a very politically divisive and in general divisive issue now, and it's only going to get worse the closer we get to the election, the 2020 election. And if a Democrat presidential candidate does not win in 2020, as we go to further congressional elections here in the US and also the 2024 presidential election, the amount of young adults that are either in college or out of college wanting a bailout for their student loan debt and that can actually vote for a candidate that is actually promising them a bailout for student loan debt or promising them universal basic income or promising them free healthcare, promising them Green New Deal, all these other promises. But the only way that this could be paid for, and I'm using air quotes, paid for, is with MMT and running the printing presses, those digital dollars, even faster, which would eventually hurt the dollar. Again, I want to thank my over 200 Patreon account contributors. It's over 240 now, so I added quite a bit in the last week or so. And 250 total now, I think, if you add my monthly PayPal contributors, so thank you to those. And people throw me a tip once in a while. I also take cryptocurrency donations, the top 6 ones. And then I can focus on interesting content, research, information, analysis, and financial education just like this. So what happens with student loan debt will eventually affect the American economy a lot. And if it's not dealt with in some capacity, the demographic problem here in the U.S. is only going to get worse. And I think that's why Democrat candidates are in favor of illegal immigration. I really think that that's one of the major reasons, that they see this demographic problem. And not only do they want to do the bailouts, but they also think that that will help with the demographic problem, the immigration, allowing more immigration, illegal or not. And then bailing out students for student loan debt, that will improve the demographics here in the U.S. too. Also buys more Democrat votes. Well, at least in theory it should have, because look at that parent. That parent was a Democrat. It seems that parent that confronted Elizabeth Warren, he was a working class Democrat, right? Maybe he was pro-union. And, I don't know if that guy's going to vote Democrat much longer. We'll have to see. But the Democrats are starting to piss off some of their more moderate voters, because you had Pete Buttigieg, who he went after a pro-life Democrat voter who asked him about pro-life. And he said it's no longer part of the Democrat Party. So Democrats are getting more and more radical. They're heading more and more towards MMT and bailouts, even more bailouts. Welcome to dystopia.